Join our Patreon.
Do you really want to know? We are Mythvision.
Dr. Price, if I was try and phrase this in a way that anyone who's listening can understand where I'm coming from. If I was a believer in the story, in the narrative of the New Testament, I believed in Jesus Christ. An open-minded fundamentalist, let's just put it that way. I'm open to something, but I need something to really crash my world. Make me realize that maybe Jesus is just another dying and rising God. And of course we have skeptics who deny that there are dying and rising God ideal types there. You've given examples, and you'll often mention Osiris. I didn't know if you could give us another example, and as if I'm a student who's just hearing you out without being biased, without having my mind already made up that Jesus has got to be true, my way's right, and I'm open. I'm going, okay, I have a little bit of doubt, and I'm willing to consider new evidence. Could you convince me using another ideal type other than Osiris of a dying and rising God, ideal type, and kind of take me through the details of the narrative to the other God?
Well, one would be Dionysus, with whom some of the ancients, including some Jews, equated with Jehovah. A lot of people thought that they were the same. The whole Sabazius religion seems to be based on that identification. There's a kind of a Garden of Eden myth and so on. Well, Dionysus was killed almost at birth by these... was it the Titans, something like that, who were enemies of Zeus, and Dionysus was a son of Zeus, and they dismembered him and ate him. And but that wasn't the end of him. He was called Zagreus there, and was he was supposed to be a hunting deity, but it was as an infant that they killed him. Well, what happened was that Zeus caused him to be reborn out of his thigh, and then he grew up to become Dionysus, and he became one of the most popular of the Greek deities, though he wasn't originally a Greek deity. He was from Thrace or some place further east, and he had a whole group of women followers. Jesus has patronesses that follow him around, but these people are really sort of wild, orgiastic, though chaste, we're told, sort of Pentecostal Krishna types that would go out into the wilderness, and a lot of women would get swept away in this who weren't even members. And the authorities were worried about this, and so Pentheus, the king of Thebes, I believe, is told about him. He says, this guy's dangerous, and he's misleading our women, and can you do anything about it? Well, Pentheus happens to be Dionysus's cousin, and because I guess he's related to Semele, who was the mother somehow of Dionysus. And so he decides, okay, I'm going to get rid of this guy. And his counselors, Tiresias and Cadmus and others, are saying, I don't think I would do this, Your Majesty. I mean, he's supposed to be a god, and he might not be. But if he is, you're taking an awful risk you could wind up fighting against God, which is what Gamaliel says to the Sanhedrin in Acts. And he has spies go out for reconnaissance, and they say, well, they're not really doing anything wrong. They do get drunk, but it's mainly spiritual. Let's see, that men and women are filled with the Spirit, and tongues of fire appear over their heads without burning their hair, and they prophesy and so on. And well, that doesn't convince Pentheus, so he has his goons pick up Dionysus, who's depicted as having blonde golden hair and is almost effeminate. And so he comes along quietly, though he doesn't they can't force him to. They don't yet know that he's really a god. And so he is locked up in a prison cell with Pentheus reading him the Riot Act, and Dionysus is like sparring with him and playing with him like Jesus and Pilate. And so he gets jailed, but shortly thereafter there's an earthquake that springs all the cell doors open, and they're panicking, and Dionysus strolls into the throne room like nothing's going on. He says, "How did you do this?" And I forget what he says, but he basically hypnotizes Pentheus and says that basically that you want to find out about the Maenads, the Bacchae, his followers. Well, here's your chance. And he says, however, you better go in drag, because this is mainly women. And if they see an outsider come in, you could be in big trouble. So he dresses up in drag, and by now he's kind of hypnotized and becomes a believer in Dionysus on the spot. And Dionysus muses, "I'll show this guy how much he has to suffer. He can dish it out but not take it." Once he goes out there, he sees everybody cavorting, and they do spot him, including his own mother, and they tear him apart like they did with animals they sacrificed. And so Dionysus said, well, that's what happens when you fool with Bromius or Dionysus, the son of God. And so you can see how much this influenced Philippians 6. So he's been converted against his will to a sect he once persecuted. And the God in question tells him, this is what happens when you kick against the goads, and so on. I mean, even these phrases. And let's see, and he even comments with wry irony that he's turned the tables on this mere mortal, and he was dishing it out, but now he's taken it. And this irony sort of reflects back on Jesus and Paul's conversion in Acts chapter 9 or whatever, where Jesus also appears to Ananias in Damascus and said, I will show him how much he must suffer for my name. It's as if there's a kind of malicious vengefulness going on. So there's one biggie. And so there's a death and resurrection of Dionysus, though it's part of the nativity story, oddly enough. And that just shows you've got these different mythemes that wind up in the story, even though the story is not Xeroxed, though it is clear that Luke must have known this play, the Bacchae, from Euripides, and borrowed numerous things from it. There's no question about that.
He gave his own spin and stuff. Mm-hmm.
But like verbatim stuff, it's just really amazing. So that'd be one. With Osiris, I got to just point out a couple of things. He is betrayed by his brother Set. Osiris is the god of the grain and the harvest. Set is the god of the desert. And of course, that's really what's running beneath the myth. It's an agricultural, seasonal myth and so on. Well, they have a big party, and Set surreptitiously measures out his brother's dimensions and has an elaborate sarcophagus prepared. And he says at the party, hey, look at this thing. Anybody'd be proud to be buried in this. Why don't we have a little contest here and see who fits it best, and they can have it. And so everybody's real thrilled about that, and it's like Cinderella and the slipper. And the only one it fits, no surprise, is Osiris. And as soon as he stretches out in it, Set's henchmen come and nail him into it. And then they rush out with the thing and set it adrift on the river Nile. And Isis and Nephthys, the two sisters, both of them married to Osiris, go to try to find the body. And when they do, he's dead. But then the body is lost again, and they find it again, and Isis, his body has been dismembered the second time, and Isis sews him together like the Frankenstein monster, and all of him is there except for his penis. And I don't know what that means, but there's similar themes in other ones. And she magically creates a substitute with which he impregnates her, and she becomes pregnant with Horus, the sun falcon who avenges his death, while his father descends to the realm of the dead, where he becomes the judge of the living and the dead. And Horus is basically his resurrection and reincarnation at the same time. Well, people like to say that, and his followers had the sacramental meal of bread and wine or beer because of my body is the bread because it's grain and all that. Well, people like to poke holes in this and say, well, he didn't rise and continue an earthly life. At least for long enough to impregnate his wife. He was alive on earth. Like Jesus didn't stay around too long. 1 day according to Luke, 40 days according to Acts. And then he went to reign in heaven as the judge. Well, the afterlife, the heaven of the Egyptian religion was below. So it's no different. He becomes the judge of the dead there. So it is so darn similar. It's very difficult to explain this, and it's earlier. I mean, the pyramid texts, which go back hundreds of years before Christianity, already has the belief. It says on one of the pyramids, as Osiris died, so Pharaoh so-and-so has died. As Osiris rose, the king will rise. And then later still they democratized this so that commoners could be initiated into the cult of Isis and Osiris. This became widely known in the Roman Empire and was a chief rival of Christianity. That is so close. I don't see how you can dismiss it, and it's earlier as well. Let's see.
Christianity co-opted the idea of dying with the God, rising with God, or going to rise. The promise of being able to be risen. Okay.
And that's just the difference between Romans and Colossians. In Romans, it's the promise of resurrection, and in Colossians, you have been raised with Christ. And that's what 1 Corinthians 15 is arguing against. The resurrection is already over because it happened in baptism.
Which is also why the Gospel of Thomas says, look around you, you already are risen, everybody's risen, you just didn't expect it. So that book should be in the canon, but it shouldn't because it depends on... Sorry. You were going to give another example, sorry.
Yeah, Attis, this one in some strange way is my favorite. He had a kind of a virgin birth. It was irregular and weird, but he somehow emerges from a tree trunk and so on. He is apparently the son and the consort of the mountain goddess Cybele, and who is equated by the ancients with Eve. In fact, the Naasene Christian Gnostics said that Adam, Attis, and Jesus are all the same guy. And so what happened with Attis? Well, this religion started in Phrygia, which is in Asia Minor or Turkey on today's maps, and he is the consort of Cybele, but he gets tempted by some mortal princess and marries her, and Cybele is both heartbroken and mad at this, and so she starts to pursue. I always think of it as like in Sleeping Beauty when they didn't invite Maleficent, she shows up mad as hell at the thing. Well, so she pursues the fleeing Attis, who stops under a tree and is so wrought with guilt over betraying her that he cuts off his genitals and bleeds to death. And that's, by the way, where violets get their color. his blood soaked them, and just like Jesus and the dogwood trees, right? And so Cybele is looking for her lover, whom she's ready to forgive. She finds him dead, but raises him from the dead. And so he does this resurrection dance, which is depicted on sarcophagi and so forth. And if you wanted to become a member, they would have these Krishna-like ecstatic dances in the street, and people would look, and they would, new converts would hack off their genitals and throw them into the lap of an idol of Attis and overcome, right? And Horace wrote a poem from the standpoint of somebody who did give in to the fever, sliced it off, and was remorseful that he had. Interesting psychology. But that's how you would become. So you're sharing the fate of the Savior. And every year they would have in the spring a ritual to commemorate and reenact the death of Attis. And what they would do is to strip a pine tree trunk, take a wooden effigy of Attis and tie it to it, and then place it into a cavity of some sort, entombing him. And then after 3 days, on the fourth day, it was called the Hilarion, the day of rejoicing, and they would bring the thing out, and the priest would say, "Rejoice, you initiates, for your God is saved, and we too shall be saved from ills." And so there's a Savior. He's risen from the dead after the holy women seek him out, just like before. And by sharing his fate in initiation, your immortality is guaranteed. And this was outlawed in Rome, but was very, very popular also. And you can go into Mithras and others, but these are some of the biggies. Baal's death and resurrection was celebrated, and this is hundreds of years before Christianity. So this idea that the pagans must have stole this from Christianity, we have easily datable texts that show that was not true. And the whole idea that when some of the Christian fathers said that was the case, that they ripped off Christianity, it's counteracted by the fact that they also said that that Satan he knew what was going to happen with Jesus because of his reading of the Old Testament prophecies. And so he decided, well, I'm going to throw him off the track by creating these fake Jesuses beforehand, so that when the real thing comes along, they'll say, oh yeah, we've heard that a million times. Who would use such an argument if they believed that Christianity got it from, if they knew Christianity had pinched it from other religions? Because the whole point of it is, you're saying that the other religions are previous counterfeits of what finally happened. You'd never argue that way unless you knew the other ones were older, hence the devil doing this far in advance. It's just amazing how people, when their theological back is up against the wall, will say anything.
I find it weird. There's like this phallic issue between the Attis and the Osiris situation there. So, I wonder if these dying and rising god deniers, as mythemes, okay, as archetypes, they're myth types. I wonder if they would deny those type of parallels. Like, all right, well, we won't touch the precious Jesus from Judaism, and as you guys would try to make him as Jewish as possible in its own milieu, and it's not. I wonder if they would do the same if you started paralleling Attis to Osiris. Oh, well, okay, we'll concede there, but you got to look at the New Testament different. And some of these guys probably don't believe it at all, the New Testament, but they're so defensive, or they're so well read, they get magnified into certain concepts that they forget a broader 30,000, satellite view, that I think is there, even if the details differ, the satellite view, is there. And I like what Derek Bennett said on that note, is he mentions that, this is the Mediterranean. I mean, when you look in Acts 17, which I was just reading today in discussing the Israel-only theory with another friend of mine, how Paul goes to the Jewish synagogue multiple times, and he has a run, and then he goes another one, and then he runs. Then they send him somewhere, and Silas has to follow after. He says, hey, bring him here. But while then the Spirit filled him, he decides to go to the marketplace. Now, if you look at the previous spots, the Jews went to the marketplace to collect a mob to come after him. This time, he's in a new place. His follower guys, like Silas and others, are not with him. He decides he's going to go to the marketplace. And while in the marketplace, he meets an Epicurean and the Stoic philosophers, and they're all like, what's this babbler going to say? And sure enough, because God who made the heaven and the earth and all the things, the sea, the whole nine, from one man. He made one man all the nations, and he appointed times, etc. Well, to me, that marketplace, even in the text of Acts, even though we date it late, it even says in there, brackets in there, the person who's translated this is saying that it was common, they'd come here and they'd share new ideas and different thoughts, and people learned. Mm-hmm. It's like, whoa, why wouldn't you? If this is a new thing, they had never even heard of this Paul, Christianity, Jesus, and it mentions plural too. It's interesting. These deities. It's like, what do you mean? Jesus and the resurrection, these deities, these new deities. Like, what are you talking about? So
Jesus and Anastasis, resurrection. I think that is a vestige of the same item in these others where the slain God is raised by his consort or wife or whatever. That Anastasis was the Christian goddess resurrection, and so otherwise what's she doing there? They took, Luke is saying the hearers took it as a reference to a goddess. And it makes me think this is one of those places where they mention a current belief only to laugh it off. Like thinking, but is he going among the Jews in the diaspora? Well, some idiots think that, but no. I think this is another one. You can't prove it, but I suspect that's the case, since Anat went to the netherworld to rescue Baal. Ishtar went to the netherworld to rescue Tammuz. Sabili pursued the body of Attis and raised him from the dead. Isis and Nephthys with Osiris, and so on. It just seems to me this is probably another piece of the puzzle.
Join our Patreon